There's something on the title screen for Obocchama-kun that hints at a weird story. The game was published by Namco, arguably the largest game publisher in Japan in 1991, but the copyright is held by Pack-In Video, a different publisher. Namco didn't normally make licensed games, and Pack-In Video specialized in them. And if you backtrack a little bit, you'll find that this Obocchama-kun game was developed by Arc System Works. And that makes sense, since Pack-In Video normally outsourced their games to someone else. So what happened here? Well, the safe guess in any situation like this is that there was some kind of licensing or rights issues, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The game was originally announced as being published by Pack-In Video, and some people have theorized that Pack-In Video got into some financial difficulties at this point. I don't believe that story is true. Pack-In Video publishes another PC Engine game in 7 days. Of course, that's normally preceded by playing an unlabeled cart you find in a cabin, and then receiving a mysterious phone call. Pack-In Video wasn't going anywhere. But then why did they turn over the surefire sales of a licensed game with a very popular property to Namco? It's not like Namco held the Obocchama-kun license, since Pack-In Video releases an Obocchama-kun game on the Famicom in 2 weeks. It doesn't seem to have been an issue with licensing PC Engine releases, so what else is left? The best guess that I found, and it is a guess since nobody's talking, is that there was a problem with the original developer of the game that Pack-In Video hired, and then they hired Arc System Works to finish it off, and they were under contract to provide a game to Namco. But nothing about how this game was published makes any sense at all, and PC Engine fans are mainly confused by the situation. And if that wasn't enough preamble, now you need to know about Obocchama-kun, because unlike a lot of licensed games, this one gets deep in the weeds with its source material. The simplest way to describe Obocchama-kun is it's Richie Rich if Richie was as incompetent and insane as real-world billionaires. The title character is the heir to one of the wealthiest families in the world, and he has a lot of wacky misadventures that often involve scatological humor. We're gonna keep that clean for the sake of YouTube. One of the big things about the original comic is its use of language. It's not that everything is a pun, it's more that everything's a goofy portmanteau, slamming halves of words together and building the jokes and plot on whatever weird thing pops out from that. That's the big thing that carries over to the game Obocchama-kun, because virtually everything you encounter is one of those gags. In fact, readers were asked to send in suggestions, and those were turned into the enemies for the game. All of that makes Obocchama-kun a translation nightmare, which is probably why it's never gotten any kind of release in English. Naturally, there was a cartoon that was airing when this game was released, and that cartoon was notorious. Not among the kids who were its target audience, of course, but it had parent organizations throughout Japan outraged. So you know it had to have been good. Hilariously, the biggest complaints from the PTA wasn't the poop, or the dick jokes, or anything like that. Overwhelmingly, they thought the show was just too weird. And that, finally, brings me to the video game. The plot of the game is given in a weirdly long introduction, but the gist of it is that somebody has raised the tomb of Obocchama-kun's ancestors from below his private amusement park. And Obocchama-kun's family puts him in charge of figuring it out and stopping it. The game's an action platformer made up of 4 worlds of 4 stages each, and then one final boss stage. And roughly 3/4 of the game looks identical. You're going to be walking around that same generic forest for a long time. Before each level, you get a brief introduction that shows you the 1 or 2 enemies that you'll encounter in that stage, and you're not seeing them here because they have some really severe flashing effects. The point is, no stage has more than 2 enemies. However, every stage has unique enemies. Even in World 3, where you fight birds over and over again, each level has a different kind of bird. The control scheme in Obocchama-kun is weird. It is needlessly complicated. A lot of things are tied to weird animations that don't work especially well. For example, when you press and hold down, you turn into a cat. And then if you use diagonal down, you'll run along the ground as a cat and be much faster than walking. But on the PC Engine's D-pad, this doesn't work especially well. The position to register those diagonals is kind of narrow, and so you'll either stop in place or pop back to normal when you don't intend it. Pressing button 2 attacks, and Obocchama-kun's basic attack is to throw a jam-filled cookie at people. Those also act as items that you collect on stages, and getting 20 of them will earn you an extra life. So even though he has an infinite number of those treats he can throw, the impossibly wealthy kid still wants more. If you hold down button 2 and start moving around, then Obocchama-kun turns into an old man. You move very slowly, but this has two significant advantages. First, you don't skid on slopes, something that's an enormous movement problem in this game. Second, when you jump, you go much higher and turn into a suggestive-looking peach. A real J. Alfred Prufrock kind of peach. You can defeat enemies by landing on their head, but there's some complications here. Obocchama-kun follows Super Mario Bros. Logic here. If you are moving down and pass through an enemy sprite, then you must be stepping on it, and so it dies. It doesn't have anything to do with position, and that becomes a real problem on slopes where you could be going up but above their head. Obocchama-kun is a real frail little guy and dies in just one hit, just like real-life billionaires. He already has a pretty floaty jump, and the weird way his jumping interacts with monsters makes things more difficult without being more fun. Another problem is that a lot of your enemies use pretty big sprites. When the screen scrolls vertically, the check for whether or not to display a sprite seems to be based on the bottom of it, which means that a large enemy can just be invisible while you're jumping around. And again, this is a game with one-hit kills. One more problem with jumping: if Obocchama-kun hits his head, then he falls straight back down, losing his momentum. You can hit your head on the top of the play area with just open sky above you. Getting back to your moves, if you press up, then Obocchama-kun waggles his eyebrows, a move that does absolutely nothing. On the other hand, if you're standing right next to a turtle, or on a turtle, and then press up, he'll transform into an enka singer, and one of the collectible items around him will change. If you've already collected it, well, tough luck. So if you see a turtle, you want to get to it without collecting anything, and then try singing. Usually it's one of the fruit items that will transform, and the fruit items are only worth points otherwise. But sometimes it's one of the treats. There are a lot of power-ups that are available to you this way. A carton of milk turns all enemies into stone for about 15 seconds. They'll die if you just run into them in this condition. Collecting the golden ticket will allow Obocchama-kun to turn into a bat when you double jump, and you can keep jumping and flying. The pickled onion replaces Obocchama-kun's basic attack, and it will shoot much further, though you can still only fire one at a time. All of the other items summon some assistance. The two persistent ones are the turtle amulets. The red turtle amulet summons this bodybuilder guy who will stand in front of you and protect you from incoming enemies. The blue turtle summons this crying guy who follows right behind you and will throw pans in a high arc. You typically find one of these two on every stage. Collecting the tea will summon this guy a little bit later in the level, and touching him will give you an extra life. Touching the poop will summon this person in a UFO who will fly along the screen for a short distance and then explode, destroying all of the enemies. It seems like there's two of these in the game, and both of them are in places where they can't really help you. Collecting this nut will summon Obocchama-kun's dad, who has an attack helicopter, and he slowly crosses the screen, shooting any enemies that appear. Because his pace is so slow, you can just keep running forward, and he lasts quite a while. The bosses here are a bit of a mess. The first stage boss are these dancing hippos, and you can just jump on top of one immediately and stay there the whole time. The second boss is this pig genie who comes out of 3 bottles. Don't see the third bottle? Well, that's because it's behind your extra lives. Since you need to see the bottles for the tell on when the genie's emerging, that is not great visual design. For this third boss, you dodge paintings for a while and deal with a strobe effect. If you die on a boss, you go back to the beginning of the stage because there are no checkpoints in this game. Any death takes you back to the beginning. However, when you get a game over, you go back to the title screen, and the title screen will let you select any stage that you've reached. So you effectively have infinite continues. Something that I've noticed about these licensed games as I've been doing this project is that Japanese players tend to be very forgiving of them. It can be one of the worst things I've ever played, and then the general consensus seems to be, wow, I got to play as my favorite character. 4 out of 5 stars. Obocchama did not get that for some reason. The best comment I found was, I can't call it kusoge, but it's real close. And I was a lot more hostile to this one when I started playing. If you don't read the manual, you're gonna have a bad time with this one. But after I read the manual and knew what I was doing, well, it still wasn't a good game. There's still a mountain of technical and design flaws here. And maybe that does point to that person's guess that there was a problem with the original developer, and Arc System Works came on at the last minute to fix things. Obocchama-kun is an awkward game to play. It definitely doesn't belong in the bottom tier. It's also the kind of game that I would never recommend somebody check out. The best thing about it is some of the visual design, and you got to see that by watching this video. It's a lot less fun when you're actually holding the controller. I'd call it one of the weakest Namco games from this era, though it is up to the standards of Pack-In Video's usual work.